I was arranging gingerbread cookies on a holiday platter when my father's voice sliced through the Christmas carols and cheerful conversation. He was standing by the decorated tree, crystal tumbler of whiskey in hand, smiling coldly as he delivered words that felt like daggers to my heart in front of a living room full of relatives and friends. "At least someone in this family managed to make us proud," he said, his tone deceptively casual but edged with contempt. A few uncomfortable chuckles rippled through the room. Others went silent. My eyes met his for just a moment, and I saw it, the familiar gleam of satisfaction he always wore when he thought he'd put me in my place. Before I could even process what was happening, my Uncle Richard, my father's brother and longtime ally in their subtle warfare against me, laughed and added, "Unlike her disappointment of a daughter who couldn't even finish college." His voice, carried intentionally across the room to ensure everyone heard. I froze. The ceramic platter in my hand suddenly felt unbearably heavy. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. My 16-year-old daughter, Maya, had been just behind me, excitedly arranging her handmade ornaments on the lower branches of the tree. She heard every word, and before I could gather myself, before I could protect her, she walked past me with something clutched in her hand, straight toward my father. "Grandpa," she said, her voice steady despite her trembling fingers, "I have something for you. Mom told me not to give this to you, but I think you need to see it." The entire room fell into a thick, suffocating silence. Let me back up a bit. My name is Eleanor. I'm 42. I'm a single mother, and I've been raising my daughter Maya largely on my own since she was 8. Her father, Nathan, left us for a younger colleague and moved across the country to start a new family. The divorce was brutal, emotionally and financially draining. One day I had a partner, a comfortable life, and what I thought was security. The next, I was scrambling to keep our heads above water, juggling bills, navigating custody agreements, and trying to reassure a confused child that everything would somehow be okay. Since then, it's just been Maya and me against the world. We've weathered countless storms together, moving 3 times to find affordable housing, late-night homework sessions at the kitchen table, Maya's early teenage rebellion, her anxiety, diagnosis, my constant juggling of 2 jobs while trying to finish my degree online. She's my heart, my purpose, and I've done everything humanly possible to provide her with stability and love, even when my own world felt like it was crumbling around me. But my family never saw our journey that way. They saw a woman who couldn't keep her marriage together, a woman who should have seen the signs, a woman who should have been smarter, more cautious, more traditional, especially my father, Harold. He never forgave me for the divorce, acting as though I had personally orchestrated Nathan's infidelity as some kind of attack on the family name. To him, being a divorced single mother was worse than staying in a toxic marriage. It was weakness. It was failure. It was confirmation that I hadn't measured up to his impossible standards. Unlike my younger brother, James, the golden child, the successful one, the one who married his college sweetheart, the one who went into finance, like my father wanted, the one who had a proper family with 5 children and a golden retriever in a sprawling suburban home. The one who invited Maya and me to his lavish Christmas gathering with a glossy card that said, "Aunt Eleanor and Cousin Maya." I remember holding that invitation, running my fingers over the embossed lettering and feeling a flicker of hope. Maybe this year would be different. Maybe the past could stay buried under a blanket of seasonal goodwill. Maybe, just once, we'd be treated like actual family instead of cautionary tales. We arrived at James's house with homemade gingerbread cookies I'd stayed up until 2 a.m. baking after my evening shift, and a hand-knitted scarf Maya had made for her new baby cousin, soft blue yarn with little snowflakes she'd taught herself to incorporate from YouTube tutorials. We came bearing gifts, hope, and practiced smiles, determined to focus on the joy of the season rather than the knot of anxiety that had taken up permanent residence in my stomach. But none of that mattered. Once my father opened his mouth, all it took was 2 sentences, 2 precisely aimed barbs, one from my father and one from his brother. And in that moment, I felt smaller than I'd felt in years, transported back to childhood when nothing I did was ever good enough. But my daughter didn't shrink. She didn't cry. She didn't hide. She stood up. She walked forward. She spoke. And what she gave him, what she gave all of us, was something none of us expected. That day, my family tried to shame me through my child. But Maya, my fierce, brilliant Maya, reminded me of who I really am. And what happened next changed everything. The morning of my brother's Christmas gathering started like any other winter Saturday. I made hot chocolate with extra marshmallows for Maya, even though I'd worked a double shift the day before and my body ached with exhaustion. She was buzzing with excitement, asking dozens of questions about her cousins, whether there would be games, if we could stay late enough to see the neighborhood lights. I smiled through it all, nodding, laughing, trying to match her enthusiasm, but inside my stomach was churning with dread. I didn't want to go. I hadn't wanted to RSVP in the first place. When the elegant red and gold invitation arrived in our mailbox in early December, I stared at it for a long time. The envelope was addressed to Eleanor and Maya Mitchell, handwritten in my sister-in-law Catherine's elegant script. It seemed genuine, welcoming even, but I knew better than to assume we'd be truly welcome just because we were invited. My relationship with my family has always been strained. My father, Harold Mitchell, raised us with impossibly high expectations and constant comparison. Success, achievement, appearance, reputation, these were the currencies that mattered in Dao, his world. James learned early how to navigate these waters, how to become exactly what our father wanted. I couldn't. I never could. I was the questioner, the one who wanted a career in art restoration instead of business, the one who married for love instead of status, the one who, according to my father, threw away potential at every turn. Even after Nathan left, after the humiliation of discovering his affair through an accidentally forwarded email chain, I received no comfort from my family. There were no supportive phone calls, no offers to help with Maya, no "how are you?" holding up. Just thinly veiled suggestions that perhaps I should have tried harder, or seen it coming, or considered what this would do to Maya's future. As if I hadn't spent countless nights asking myself those very questions while staring at the ceiling, tears silently soaking my pillow so Maya wouldn't hear me cry. Still, I accepted the invitation because Maya wanted to go. Because some part of me, perhaps the most optimistic, foolishly hopeful part, thought that maybe, just maybe, 6 years was long enough for wounds to heal and bridges to mend. Maybe Christmas, with its promise of renewal and goodwill, could soften even my father's granite heart. We spent the night before wrapping our modest gifts. Maya insisted on making all the bows herself, meticulously curling ribbons with the edge of a scissor just as I'd taught her. For her cousins, she'd selected books based on interests she remembered from their last brief encounter: dinosaurs for Ethan, space for Liam, and a picture book about a brave princess for little Sophie. I'd made gingerbread cookies from my grandmother's recipe, the one tradition I'd managed to preserve from my childhood. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive, but thoughtful, made with care and love. James's house was a stunning Victorian in the historic district of our hometown, a full hour's drive from our small apartment. We pulled up in my 10-year-old Honda, its muffler announcing our arrival with an embarrassing rattle. Maya clutched the gift bags to her chest, taking extra care not to wrinkle the tissue paper she'd arranged just so. Her winter boots crunched in the fresh snow as she made her way up the shoveled walkway, marveling at the professional light display that transformed my brother's home into something from a holiday movie. When we stepped inside, the first thing that struck me was the perfection of it all. A massive tree soared toward the high ceiling, adorned with color-coordinated ornaments and twinkling white lights. Garlands draped elegantly across the staircase and mantels, punctuated with red berries and pine cones. The air smelled of cinnamon and pine and wealth, a scent my own home could never quite capture despite my best efforts with discount candles and simmer pots. It was beautiful, undeniably so, and for a moment I allowed myself to believe we might actually enjoy the day. Catherine greeted us with hugs that seemed almost warm. She looked radiant in a deep green cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my entire outfit. Her blonde hair was swept into an effortless-looking updo that I knew required both time and professional assistance to achieve. She cooed over Maya's growth spurt and led us into the great room where the rest of the family had gathered. James looked up from a conversation with our father and gave a quick wave, but didn't break away to greet us properly. My father didn't even turn around. I felt Maya tense beside me, her teenage perception far more acute than I gave her credit for. I squeezed her hand and whispered, "It's okay, let's find your cousins." We navigated through clusters of relatives and friends, receiving polite nods and brief hellos. I could feel the glances, the quick once-overs that assessed my simple black dress and Maya's hand-me-down holiday sweater that she'd personalized, with embroidered snowflakes to hide a small stain. I was used to these evaluations. That part didn't surprise me. What did surprise me was how Maya held her head high through it all. She laughed genuinely when Ethan showed her his new remote control car. She complimented Sophie on her dress with such sincerity that the little girl twirled with delight. She engaged my Aunt Marjorie in a thoughtful conversation about the book she was reading for school. My daughter moved through that space with a grace I hadn't learned until well into adulthood, if ever. I watched her from across the room as I arranged cookies on a serving platter, feeling a swell of pride so intense it momentarily eclipsed my anxiety. She was carrying a small velvet pouch I hadn't seen before. When I caught her eye with a questioning look, she just smiled and mouthed, "It's a surprise." I didn't press further, assuming it was some small trinket she'd made or saved up for. Maya was always creating things, sketches, poems, little crafts from materials we had around our apartment. She had her father's artistic eye, but, thankfully, my perseverance. I remember watching James unwrap his mountain of gifts. Catherine, by his side, their perfect children sitting patiently, waiting their turns. People oohed and awed over golf clubs and designer accessories and electronic gadgets that cost more than our monthly rent. The contrast between their abundance and our carefully budgeted offerings was stark, but I tried not to let it bother me. Things weren't what mattered. Connection was. Family was. Or at least that's what I kept telling myself as I felt increasingly out of place in this showcase of prosperity. When it came time for the children to exchange gifts, Maya stepped forward, with the bags she'd prepared. She'd used paper from our recycling bin, decorated with her own artwork to make them special. The cousins tore into them with typical childish enthusiasm, and to my relief, seemed genuinely pleased with her selections. Ethan immediately opened his dinosaur encyclopedia, pointing out his favorite prehistoric beasts to Maya, who knelt beside him with genuine interest. That's when my father stood up, drink in hand, commanding the room's attention with the same authoritative presence that had dominated my childhood. He cleared his throat, glass raised in a toast. "Before we continue," he said, "I want to take a moment to recognize what a tremendous year it's been for this family." His voice was measured, dignified, every inch the successful patriarch. James has made partner at the firm. Catherine has raised over $200,000 for the children's hospital. And my grandchildren, he paused to smile at Ethan, Liam and Sophie, are excelling in ways that make a grandfather truly proud. There were nods, murmurs of agreement. Some raised their glasses. I felt the first warning prickle at the back of my neck. "It's a blessing," he continued, "to see the Mitchell legacy carried forward with such distinction. To see my son building." Exactly the kind of life we always envisioned for him. Successful, respected, complete. My fingers tightened around the platter I was holding. I knew what was coming. I could feel it approaching like an oncoming train, and I was tied to the tracks by years of conditioning to endure whatever came next. Then the blow landed. "At least someone in this family managed to make us proud," he said, looking directly at me with those cold blue eyes that had judged me my entire life. My heart dropped to the floor. I looked away, pretending to adjust the cookies on my platter, pretending I didn't hear him, pretending I wasn't bleeding internally. But he knew I heard. Everyone did. And then, like a coordinated attack, my uncle, Richard, chuckled and added, unlike her disappointment of a daughter who couldn't even finish college. The word echoed in my head. Disappointment. Disappointment. A verdict delivered. A judgment finalized. And worse, much worse, they'd dragged Maya into it. They'd reduced my brilliant, resilient, extraordinary daughter to a failure before she'd even had the chance to begin her life. I felt her presence before I saw her. Maya had been behind me, had heard every syllable of their cruelty. I turned to reach for her, to shield her somehow, but she was already moving past me. Her face was composed, eerily calm, but I could see the storm in her eyes, my eyes looking back at me from her face. She walked straight toward my father, holding that small velvet pouch in her hand like it contained something infinitely precious. "Grandpa," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor I could see in her fingers. "I have something for you. Mom told me not to give this to you, but I think you need to see it." I was frozen, confused. I hadn't told her not to give anything. To my father. I had no idea what she was about to do. The entire room went silent, the Christmas music suddenly seeming inappropriately cheerful in the background. My father looked down at Maya with a mixture of surprise and condescension, clearly not expecting to be interrupted by the very person he'd just dismissed. What happened next would change our family forever, though none of us knew it yet. Sigh. That moment, as Maya stood before my father with her head held high and that mysterious pouch in her hand, I realized I was witnessing something rare and powerful. The moment when someone too young to have learned fear chooses truth over peace, courage over comfort. And as my heart pounded wildly in my chest, I wondered what truth my daughter was about to unleash. I watched Maya stand before my father with a confidence I never possessed at her age. Her shoulders were squared, chin slightly lifted, the poise of someone twice her years emanating from her slender frame. The velvet pouch in her hand seemed to hold all the gravity in the room. My father's expression shifted from dismissive to curious, a flicker of something, perhaps uncertainty, crossing his usually implacable features. Maya opened the drawstring of the pouch with deliberate slowness. The room was so quiet, I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking away seconds that felt eternal. She pulled out a small object that caught the light from the Christmas tree, something metal, something that glinted gold. It was a pocket watch, not just any pocket watch, but my grandfather's antique timepiece that had been missing for nearly 2 decades. "This belonged to Great-Grandpa Mitchell," Maya said, her voice clear as a bell in the silent room. "Mom doesn't know I found it." My father's face drained of color. He stared at the watch, momentarily speechless, a condition I'd never witnessed in him before. I was equally stunned. That watch had disappeared right after my grandfather passed, away when I was in college. My father had torn the house apart looking for it, convinced one of the home health aides had stolen it. It was his father's most prized possession, a family heirloom with a storied past that my grandfather had promised to my father since he was a boy. "Where did you get that?" My father's voice was barely above a whisper, his eyes fixed on the timepiece as if it might vanish again. "I found it in Mom's memory box last month when I was looking for old photos for a school project," Maya replied. She held it out to him, but didn't immediately release it when he reached for it. But there's something inside you need to see first. With steady fingers, Maya opened the watch's case. Inside, opposite the watch face, was a small photograph I'd never seen before. From where I stood, I couldn't make out the details, but I could see my father's expression transform as he looked at it. "There's also this," Maya said, pulling a folded piece of paper from the pouch. It was tucked behind the photo. The paper trembled slightly in her hand, the only sign of her nervousness, as she unfolded it and began to read aloud. "My dearest Eleanor," she began, and I realized with a jolt that these were words I'd never heard, words addressed to me. "If you're reading this, it means I've passed on before having the courage to say these things to your father myself. I want you to know that I have always seen your light, even when others tried to dim it." Maya's voice grew stronger as she continued. "Your father and I disagreed fundamentally about what success means. He believes it's measured in titles and bank accounts. I've come to understand it's measured in moments of authentic joy and lives touched by kindness. By that measure, you are the most successful person I know." The words hit me like physical blows. These were my grandfather's thoughts, the grandfather who had always seemed so aligned with my father's worldview, who had rarely intervened in our family dynamics. I had loved him deeply, but had never felt truly known by him. Yet here were his words, speaking directly to my heart across the years. Maya continued reading, her gaze occasionally flicking up to gauge my father's reaction. "Harold misunderstands strength. He sees it as never bending, never showing vulnerability. But true strength is what your daughter shows every day: resilience. In the face of hardship, courage to choose her own path despite pressure to conform. She has your grandmother's spirit, and I couldn't be prouder." Tears welled in my eyes. I hadn't known my grandfather felt this way. I had spent decades believing I had disappointed him too. The letter went on, addressing my father directly. "Now, Harold, my son, if you're reading this, I have failed to tell you something important. Your relentless pursuit of what you think is excellence has cost you true connection with your daughter. You are missing the extraordinary person she is because you're too focused on who you think she should be. Don't make the same mistake I made with you for too long. Life is shorter than you think, and legacy isn't what you leave in a bank account. It's what you leave in the hearts of those who knew you." My father's hand shook visibly as he took the letter from Maya. His face had lost its composure entirely. For the first time in my adult life, I saw something raw and unguarded in his expression. Confusion, pain, perhaps even shame. "The watch isn't what matters," Maya said quietly. "What matters is that Great-Grandpa Mitchell wanted Mom to have it. He left it for her specifically, with this letter. But someone took it before she could receive it." My eyes darted to Uncle Richard, whose face had gone pale. The pieces suddenly clicked together in my mind. Richard, who had helped search for the watch all those years ago. Richard, who had always resented that my grandfather seemed to have a soft spot for me despite my father's disapproval. "Richard," my father said slowly, turning to his brother. The single word held a question, an accusation, and a dawning realization. My uncle's face flushed deep red. "It should have gone to you," he muttered. Dad was getting sentimental and confused toward the end. I was just making sure family traditions were upheld. By stealing from my daughter? My father's voice was dangerously quiet. The room was absolutely still. Even the children seemed to understand that something momentous was happening. Catherine had a hand pressed to her mouth. James looked bewildered, as if the family he thought he knew was transforming before his eyes. Maya stood her ground, neither retreating nor pressing her advantage. "I'm not giving you the watch, Grandpa," she said firmly. "I'm giving you a chance. Great-Grandpa wrote that it's never too late to change how you see things. He said pride makes a poor companion in old age." Then she turned to me, her eyes shining with emotions too complex for her young face. Mom didn't know about this. She never saw the letter. But I wanted you all to know that she comes from greatness too. And so do I. There was no anger in her voice, no accusation, just simple truth delivered with quiet dignity. And in that moment, I saw my daughter. Really saw her. Not as an extension of myself or a reflection of my choices, but as her own person, wise, beyond her years, carrying a moral compass that pointed truer than many adults I knew. My father remained frozen, the watch in one hand, the letter in the other. The symbols of his father's love and disappointment, tangible now in a way they hadn't been before. After what seemed an eternity, he looked up, not at Maya, but at me. His eyes, so like my own, searched my face as if seeing it clearly for the first time in decades. "Eleanor," he said, my name sounding strange on his lips, stripped of the usual judgment. He seemed about to say more, but words failed him. The mighty Harold Mitchell, rendered speechless by a 16-year-old girl and the ghost of his father. I moved then, crossing the room to stand beside my daughter. I placed a hand on her shoulder, drawing strength from her courage. "Maya," I said softly, "how long have you known about this?" "Since October," she replied. "I've been trying to decide what to do. I wasn't going to say anything, but then..." She glanced meaningfully at my father and uncle. "I couldn't let them talk about you like that. Not when I know the truth." The truth. Such a simple word for such a complex thing. The truth that my grandfather had seen value in me that his son couldn't. The truth that my daughter possessed a moral clarity that put us all to shame. The truth that somewhere in our family's history, someone had deliberately kept me from receiving not just an heirloom, but validation that might have changed the course of my life. My Aunt Marjorie, my father's eldest sister, stepped forward. Then, unlike Richard, she had always been kind to me in her reserved way. "Harold," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Dad talked to me about this before he died. He knew what Richard was planning. He made me promise to make it right if I ever had the chance." She turned to me. "I'm sorry, Eleanor. I should have said something years ago." "Why didn't you?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. She looked down. "Fear, I suppose. Fear of disrupting the family. Fear of challenging Harold. It was easier to stay quiet." Her eyes lifted to Maya. "It took a child to show me what courage looks like." The Christmas gathering had transformed into something else entirely, a family reckoning decades in the making. The carefully curated holiday cheer had given way to something raw and painful, but also potentially healing. My brother James approached slowly, the confusion on his face giving way to something like shame. "I didn't know," he said simply, looking between me and our father. "I never knew any of this." "You weren't meant to," my father said, his voice rough with emotion he rarely displayed. "You were meant to follow the path I set. Eleanor was meant to." He trailed off, perhaps realizing for the first time how it sounded, that I was meant to fail so that James's success would shine brighter. Maya, still standing tall despite the tension surrounding her, spoke again. "Great-grandpa's letter says something else, too." She reached for the paper in my father's hand. He surrendered it without resistance. She found her place and read, "The true measure of a parent isn't the accomplishments of their children, but the compassion and integrity with which those children move through the world. By that measure, Harold, your daughter has given you a gift you've yet to recognize." My heart swelled with gratitude for the grandfather who had seen me, truly seen me, even if he hadn't found the courage to intervene during his lifetime. And for my daughter, who had the wisdom to know when his words needed to be heard. The silence that followed was broken by a sound I hadn't heard in perhaps 20 years. My father crying. Not dramatic sobs, but the quiet, devastating tears of a man confronting a lifetime of misplaced values. He sank slowly into the nearest chair, the watch clutched in his hand, its gold case catching the Christmas lights in fractured patterns. I felt no triumph in his breakdown, no vindication. Just a profound sadness for all the years we'd lost, all the love that had been withheld in service to an idea of success that had hollowed him out from the inside. "Dad?" I said softly, the word feeling foreign on my tongue after years of distance. I moved toward him, unsure of what I would do when I reached him, but knowing I needed to bridge the space between us somehow. Before I could reach him, little Sophie, not quite understanding the adult complexities unfolding but sensing her grandfather's distress, toddled over and placed her small hand on his knee. "Don't cry, Grandpa," she said. "It's Christmas." The simple compassion of a child broke something open in the room. Catherine wiped tears from her eyes. James put an arm around her shoulders. Even Uncle Richard looked shaken, the comfortable narrative of our family visibly crumbling around him. My father looked up at me, then at Maya, his expression naked with grief and regret. "I don't know how to fix this," he admitted. Perhaps the first time in his life he'd acknowledged not having an answer. Maya stepped forward, her composure still, intact despite the emotional maelstrom she'd unleashed. "Great-grandpa said it's never too late to start seeing differently." She reached out and closed my father's fingers around the watch. "Maybe you could start by keeping this safe until you've earned it back." It was a profound gesture, not forgiveness exactly, but an open door to the possibility of redemption. My father nodded slowly, understanding the weight of what she was offering. I moved to Maya's side and put my arm around her shoulders. "We should go," I said quietly. The gathering had been transformed beyond recognition, and I knew everyone needed space to process what had happened. "Stay," James said suddenly, surprising me. "Please, I think we need to talk, as a family. Really talk, maybe for the first time." I hesitated, looking at Maya. This was her moment too, and I wouldn't make the decision without her. She considered for a moment, then nodded. "We can stay a little longer." The next hour unfolded like nothing I could have imagined when we'd arrived that morning. The pretense of perfect holiday cheer was abandoned. Instead, seated in my brother's living room with mugs of hot chocolate, Catherine's suggestion, a return to simplicity, truths long buried began to surface. My father spoke haltingly at first, then with increasing honesty about his own father's expectations, the crushing weight of being the son who would redeem the family name after my grandfather's humble beginnings. How he'd transferred those same expectations to his children, believing he was preparing us for success rather than burdening us with impossible standards. I shared what it had been like growing up feeling perpetually inadequate, then raising a child alone while carrying that same sense of failure. James admitted to the pressure he'd felt to be perfect, the constant fear that one misstep would cost him our father's approval. Catherine confessed she'd orchestrated much of their picture-perfect life out of fear rather than joy, always worried they weren't quite meeting expectations. Uncle Richard left early, mumbling excuses, unable to face the dismantling of the family, mythology he'd helped maintain. Aunt Marjorie stayed, occasionally filling in historical gaps, providing context for patterns of behavior that stretched back generations. Through it all, Maya watched and listened, occasionally offering observations with a clarity that made the adults pause. There was wisdom in her youth, unclouded by decades of rationalization and compromise. She didn't offer easy forgiveness, but she didn't hold on to bitterness either. She simply insisted on truth, on seeing people as they were, rather than as she wished them to be. As the afternoon light began to fade, casting long shadows across the room, my father turned to Maya. "You said I needed to earn back the watch," he said. "How do I do that?" Maya considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. I think you start by really seeing my mom, she said finally. Not who you wanted her to be, who she actually— She glanced at me, her eyes full of a love so pure it nearly broke me. She's the strongest person I know. She works 2 jobs and still helps me with homework. She never says bad things about my dad even though he left us. She makes holidays special even when we don't have much money. She taught me that kindness matters more than being right. Each word was a balm on wounds I hadn't realized were still so raw. To be seen, truly seen by my child was a gift beyond measure. And, Maya continued, turning back to my father, you have to stop comparing everyone. Mom doesn't have to be like Uncle James to be successful. I don't have to be like my cousins to matter. She looked around at the family gathered there. Great-grandpa's letter said we're all branches from the same tree, but we're supposed to grow in different directions toward the light. A metaphor my practical, business-minded father would never have come up with himself, but one that visibly moved him. He nodded slowly, absorbing her words. I'd like to read the whole letter, I said quietly. When we're home. Maya nodded. It's for you. He wanted you to have it. She paused. And I'm sorry I went through your memory box without asking. I laughed softly, the sound surprising in the emotional density of the room. I think we can let that go, under the circumstances. As we prepared to leave a few hours later, the gathering having evolved into something unrecognizable from its beginning, my father approached me by the door. He looked older somehow, the careful facade of strength he'd maintained for decades, cracked open to reveal the vulnerable human beneath. Eleanor, he said, my name still sounding strange without its usual freight of disappointment. I don't expect you to forgive me today, or tomorrow, or maybe ever. He looked down at the watch in his hand, then carefully placed it in my palm, closing my fingers around it. But this belongs to you. Your grandfather wanted you to have it. I was wrong to let it be kept from you. I felt the weight of the timepiece in my hand, not just its physical presence, but the history it carried, the validation it represented. Thank you, I said simply. Your daughter, he continued, glancing to where Maya was saying goodbye to her cousins. She's extraordinary. You've done what I couldn't. Raised a child who knows her own mind and speaks her truth. The admission clearly cost him, but he pushed through. I'd like to know her better, to know you both better, if you'll allow it. It wasn't a Hollywood moment of instant reconciliation. There was too much history, too much hurt for that. But it was an opening, a crack in a door long thought permanently closed. We'll see, I said, neither committing nor refusing. It would take time, and effort, real effort. He nodded, accepting the boundary. I understand. As Maya and I walked to our car through the gently falling snow, the weight of the day settled around us like the darkness of the winter evening. I put my arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. You know, I said, you didn't have to do that. Stand up to them for me. She leaned into me, suddenly looking very much her 16 years after the maturity she'd displayed all day. Yes, I did, she said simply. They needed to know who you really are, who we really are. We drove home in comfortable silence, the watch secure in my purse, its presence a tangible link to a past I thought I'd lost, and a future I couldn't yet imagine. The Christmas lights of the neighborhoods we passed blurred slightly through the windshield, or perhaps through my tears. Not tears of sadness or even relief, but of something more complex. The recognition that sometimes it takes a child to lead us back to our truest selves, to remind us of the courage we've had all along. What happened that Christmas Day didn't magically heal decades of family dysfunction? There would be backsliding, awkward conversations, moments when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves. But something fundamental had shifted. A truth had been spoken that couldn't be unheard. And in that truth lay the possibility of something new. My daughter had given all of us, a gift far more precious than any watch, any heirloom, any material possession. She had given us the chance to see ourselves and each other clearly, perhaps for the first time. And in that clarity, painful as it was, lay the seeds of genuine connection. The drive home from my brother's house felt surreal, as if we were traveling, not just through the snowy streets, but across some invisible boundary between the life we'd known and something entirely new. Maya sat quietly beside me, occasionally reaching over to adjust the heat or the radio, but mostly lost in her own thoughts. The pocket watch rested in my purse between us, its presence like a third passenger in our car. "Are you okay?" I finally asked as we turned onto our street, the modest apartment building coming into view, its simple string of multicolored lights along the balcony railings a far cry from James's professional display. Maya considered the question with the thoughtfulness that was so characteristic of her. "I think so," she said after a moment. "Are you?" It was such an adult question, such a reversal of our usual roles that I almost laughed. But there was nothing humorous about the day we'd just experienced, about the way my 16-year-old daughter had stood up and changed the course of our family history with nothing but truth and courage. I searched for the right word as I pulled into our parking spot. "I'm processing. It's a lot to take in." We sat there for a moment with the engine off, watching the snow drift down in the glow of the streetlights. Neither of us seemed eager to move, to break the contemplative bubble that surrounded us. "I'm sorry I went through your memory box," Maya said suddenly. "I shouldn't have done that without asking." I turned to look at her, this remarkable young woman who had somehow grown up while I was busy trying to keep our lives together. "Why did you?" I asked, genuinely curious rather than accusatory. She fiddled with the zipper of her coat. "I was working on that family history project for social studies. I wanted to surprise you with it for Christmas. But then I found the watch and the letter and—" She trailed off, looking down at her hands. "I was angry, not at you, at them, for how they've always treated you, for how they never talk about great-grandpa except to mention his watch. It felt like they were hiding something, and then I knew they were." The depth of her perception struck me anew. At 16, she had intuited family dynamics that had taken me decades to understand. "That was a big decision to make on your own," I said softly, "to confront them like that." "I wasn't planning to do it today," she admitted. "I was going to talk to you first. But then Grandpa and Uncle Richard said those things and I just—" She looked up at me, her eyes suddenly fierce. "I couldn't let them keep lying. Not about you, not about us." I reached across the console and took her hand, feeling the strength in her slender fingers. "You were incredibly brave today. But you shouldn't have had to be. That wasn't your burden to carry." "It wasn't yours either," she replied with a wisdom that made my heart ache. "But you've been carrying it my whole life." We made our way up to our apartment in comfortable silence, both tired from the emotional marathon of the day. Our home felt especially welcoming after the tension at James's house, small but cozy, lived in rather than showcased. The little artificial tree we decorated together stood in the corner, its mismatched ornaments telling the story of our lives together. Clay handprints from preschool, beaded creations from summer camp, the tiny silver frame with Maya's kindergarten photo. I hung up our coats while Maya went to put on the kettle for tea, our evening ritual regardless of the day we'd had. As I emptied my purse, the weight of the pocket watch reminded me of everything that had transpired. I held it in my palm, really looking at it for the first time. It was beautiful in an understated way, gold but not ostentatious, clearly valuable but designed for function rather than show. The initials, TMM, were engraved on the back, Thomas Malcolm Mitchell, my grandfather. I opened it carefully, and there was the photograph Maya had shown my father. It was of me at about 12, sitting on my grandfather's lap in his study, both of us laughing at something off camera. I had no memory of the picture being taken, but the joy in it was undeniable. "He kept that with him," Maya said, coming back into the living room with 2 steaming mugs. "That's what the letter says. He carried you with him every day." I traced the outline of our faces with my fingertip, a lump forming in my throat. "I never knew." "There's more," Maya said, setting down the mugs and disappearing into her bedroom. She returned with a manila envelope that she handed to me almost reverently. The whole letter, and some other things I found with it. I settled onto the couch, Maya beside me, and opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a handwritten letter, several pages long, in my grandfather's distinctive script. There were also newspaper clippings, what looked like journal entries, and several more photographs I'd never seen. "I've only read parts of the letter," Maya confessed. "The parts I thought Grandpa needed to hear today. The rest felt too private." I was touched by her discretion, by the boundaries she'd instinctively respected, even while making such a monumental decision. "Thank you," I said softly, then began to read. What unfolded in those pages was nothing short of a revelation. My grandfather wrote of his regrets, how he'd been too strict with my father, how he'd prioritized financial success over emotional connection, how he'd watched the same patterns repeating with my father and me but had lacked the courage to intervene. Directly, he wrote of his pride in me, in my creativity, my resilience, my unwillingness to compromise on what truly mattered to me. He described watching me with baby Maya after Nathan left, seeing a strength in me that he believed was the true Mitchell. Legacy, not the financial empire he and my father had built. The newspaper clippings were from art exhibitions where my restoration work had been mentioned, from community events where I'd volunteered, even a small article about a children's art therapy program I'd helped establish at the local shelter. He'd been following my life all along, taking pride in accomplishments my father had dismissed as inconsequential. The photographs spanned years, me at high school graduation, Maya as a toddler, the 2 of us at the park. Moments I never knew had been witnessed, preserved by someone who saw value in them. "He was watching over us," Maya said quietly, "even when it seemed like nobody in the family cared." I wiped tears from my cheeks, overwhelmed by the evidence of a love I'd never fully recognized. "Why didn't he tell me any of this while he was alive?" "He explains that," Maya said, gently turning to the final page of the letter. "He was trying to find the courage." He wrote this just a week before he died. I read the last paragraph, my grandfather's words reaching across time to touch my heart. "My greatest regret, Eleanor, is that I lacked the courage to stand against my own son, to demand he see the remarkable woman you are. I told myself I was keeping the peace, but in truth, I was avoiding conflict out of cowardice. If you take anything from my life, let it be this lesson. Don't wait to speak your truth. Don't wait to stand up for those you love. Time runs out more quickly than we imagine, and the words we leave unsaid become the heaviest burdens for those left behind. You deserved a champion, and I failed you in that regard. But know that I saw you, truly saw you, and in you I found the best of what our family could be." I closed the letter, holding it against my heart as tears flowed freely now. Maya leaned her head on my shoulder, her own eyes glistening. "He would have been so proud of you today," I whispered. "Do you think so?" she asked, suddenly sounding very young. "I know so. You did what he couldn't. You spoke truth to power. You refused to let fear silence you." I kissed the top of her head. "You're the champion he wished he could have been." We sat in silence for a while, sipping our tea, letting the magnitude of the day settle around us. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in pristine white, nature's own way of suggesting we could start anew. "What happens now?" Maya eventually asked. "With Grandpa and everyone?" It was the question I'd been turning over in my mind during the drive home. What did happen now? Could decades of emotional distance be bridged by a single moment of truth? Should they be? I don't know exactly, I admitted, but I think we take it slowly, on our terms. Your grandfather has a lot to process, a lot to reckon with, and so do I. Maya nodded thoughtfully. Do you think people can really change? At his age? It was a profound question, one that adults twice her age still struggled with. I considered it carefully before answering. I think people can change at any age if they want to badly enough. The question is whether the desire to change is stronger than the comfort of staying the same. I tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Your grandfather has built his entire identity around certain beliefs about success and family. Changing. Those won't be easy for him. But it would be worth it, right? The hopeful note in her voice reminded me that for all her maturity, she was still a child in many ways, one who wanted to believe in the possibility of reconciliation, of happy endings. It would be, I agreed, for all of us. But sweetheart, I don't want you to get your hopes too high too quickly. Real change takes time. There might be setbacks. She straightened up, a determined set to her jaw. Then we'll handle them. Together. Together, I echoed, marveling at her resilience, at the steady moral compass that guided her. Where had this extraordinary human come from? How had I, stumbling through single parenthood, often doubting myself, somehow raised a daughter with such clarity and courage? The next morning, I woke to the smell of pancakes. I found Maya in the kitchen, flour on her cheek, carefully flipping a slightly misshapen pancake. She'd set the table with our chipped holiday plates, put out the good maple syrup we saved for special occasions, and even arranged some pine branches from the park in a jar for a centerpiece. "What's all this?" I asked, touched by the effort. She shrugged, trying for casual but not quite succeeding. "I just thought we deserved something nice today, after yesterday." I hugged her from behind, resting my chin on her head, a position that wouldn't be possible much longer given how quickly she was growing. "It's perfect. Thank you." We were halfway through breakfast when my phone rang. I glanced at the screen and felt my stomach tighten. "It's your grandfather," I said, showing Maya the display. She nodded encouragingly. "You should answer it." I took a deep breath and picked up. "Hello, Dad." Eleanor. His voice sounded different, less certain, more human. "I hope I'm not calling too early." "We're having breakfast," I said, neither welcoming nor dismissing. "I see." He cleared his throat. "I've been up most of the night, reading your grandfather's letter. All of it." He paused and I could hear him gathering himself. I had no idea he felt that way. About you. About me. About any of it. I waited, not rushing to fill the silence as I might have once done. "I'm not calling to make excuses," he continued finally. "There aren't any that would suffice. But I would like to see you, both of you, when you're ready." I glanced at Maya, who was watching me intently. "I think we need some time," I said carefully. "Yesterday was a lot." "Of course," he said quickly. "I understand. Just know that I'm here, when you're ready." After we hung up, Maya raised an eyebrow. "He's trying," she observed. "Yes," I acknowledged. "He is." "That's something, isn't it?" I smiled at her hopefulness. "It's a start." The days following Christmas unfolded in unexpected ways. My phone buzzed more frequently than it had in years, messages from family members who'd witnessed the confrontation, some expressing support, others uncomfortable but reaching out nonetheless. James called to invite us to dinner, just the four of them and us, no parents, no extended family. "I think we've got some catching up to do," he said awkwardly. "Real catching up, not the holiday newsletter version." Catherine sent a thoughtful, email apologizing for her complicity in the family dynamics, for never questioning the narrative about me, for allowing Maya to be sidelined among her cousins. "I've been so caught up in appearances," she wrote, "that I've missed the chance to know my niece. And I'm realizing my sister-in-law, too. Even Aunt Marjorie reached out, offering to share more stories about my grandfather, to fill in gaps. In my understanding of his life and his relationship with my father, each message, each overture represented a small crack in the facade of family mythology we'd all been living behind. None of them constituted a complete transformation, but together they suggested the possibility of something new taking root. I approached each contact cautiously, neither rushing to embrace nor quick to dismiss. I'd spent too many years being diminished by these relationships to dive back in without care. But I also recognized the courage it took for them to reach out, to acknowledge, however tentatively, their role in the dynamics that had hurt me for so long. 3 days after Christmas, a package arrived at our door. It was addressed to Maya, the handwriting unmistakably my father's precise script. She opened it at the kitchen table while I pretended not to hover anxiously nearby. Inside was a journal, leather-bound, clearly old but well-preserved. A note rested on top. "This was your great-grandfather's. I thought you might like to have it. He was a better man than I understood. Perhaps you'll find something of him in these pages that will help you know where you come from. Your courage is his legacy, not our money or status. I'm beginning to understand that now. With respect and admiration, your grandfather." Maya traced the embossed initials on the cover with gentle fingers. "Do you mind if I read it?" she asked. Me. "Of course not," I said. "It was given to you." She smiled, a complicated expression that held both wonder and wariness. "But he's your grandfather. These are your family stories, too." Her consideration for my feelings, even in this moment, moved me deeply. "We'll read it together then," I suggested, "if you'd like to share it." That night, we curled up on the couch and opened Thomas Mitchell's journal. What we discovered was a rich inner life I'd never known my pragmatic, business-minded grandfather possessed. He wrote about art and literature. He described walks in nature with the attentiveness of a poet. He questioned the purpose of wealth accumulation even as he built his business. And he wrote about his children, my father and his siblings, with a mixture of love, worry, and regret that felt achingly familiar to me as a parent. One entry in particular caught my attention. Written when my father was about Maya's age, it read, "Harold continues to excel in all the ways that can be measured by others. His grades, his athletic achievements, his popular standing, all exceptional. Yet I find myself increasingly concerned by what cannot be measured. His capacity for empathy, his ability to find joy in simple pleasures, his willingness to question rather than simply achieve. Have I done him a disservice by focusing so intently on his successes? Have I inadvertently taught him that worth comes only from accomplishment? I fear I've helped shape a young man who will someday have everything society values and yet miss entirely what makes life worth living." My grandfather had seen it all, the patterns, the potential pitfalls, decades before they fully manifested. He had worried about the very traits in my father that would later cause such pain in our relationship, and yet he'd been unable to change course, trapped perhaps by his own conditioning, his own fears. "It's like a warning that nobody heard," Maya said softly. "Or that he couldn't speak loudly enough," I added. We read late into the night, absorbing the wisdom, the regrets, and the hopes of a man neither of us had fully known in life. It felt like reclaiming a piece of my heritage that had been denied to me, not the material legacy that had always been centered in family discussions, but the spiritual and intellectual inheritance that had been largely ignored. The following. Week as New Year's approached, I made a decision that surprised even me. I called my father and invited him to coffee. Just him, no other family members, in a neutral public place where we could talk without the weight of family history pressing down on us physically. Maya raised her eyebrows when I told her. Are you sure? No, I said honestly, but I think it's necessary. For me, as much as for him. Do you want me to come with you? She offered immediately, ready as always to be my champion. I shook, my head touched by her protectiveness. This is something I need to do alone, adult to adult. We met at a small cafe downtown, the kind of place my father would never normally frequent with its mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. I arrived first, deliberately choosing a quiet corner table where we wouldn't be easily overheard. When he walked in, I was struck by how much older he looked than at Christmas, just a week before. The carefully maintained facade of the powerful patriarch had slipped, revealing the 72-year-old man beneath. He spotted me and navigated between the tables with uncharacteristic hesitation. Eleanor, he said, remaining standing until I gestured for him to sit. Thank you for suggesting this. I nodded, taking a moment to order coffee for us both before addressing him directly. I've been reading Grandpa's journal, I said, the one you sent to Maya. Something flickered across his face, regret, perhaps, or resignation. I should have shared it with you years ago. It was in his desk when he died. I read enough to know it would challenge my worldview. So I put it away. The admission, so straightforward and unembellished, surprised me. Why send it to Maya now? He considered the question as our coffees arrived. Because she deserves to know where she comes from. The courage she showed at Christmas. That didn't come from nowhere. It's in her blood. My father had it, though he rarely used it. You have it too. He looked directly at me, perhaps truly seeing me for the first time in decades. You've shown it every day, raising her on your own, staying true to yourself despite the pressure I put on you to be someone else. I wrapped my hands around my mug, absorbing the unexpected acknowledgement. It hasn't been easy. No, he agreed quietly. And I made it harder. I can see that now. We sat in silence for a moment, the ambient noise of the cafe washing over us. This was uncharted territory for both of us, a conversation without the usual defenses, without the practiced roles we'd played for so long. I'm not sure where we go from here, I admitted finally. There's a lot of history between us. He nodded slowly. I don't expect forgiveness, Eleanor, or even understanding. But I would like the chance to know you, the real you, not the version of you I tried to force you to become. And I'd like to know Maya better. A hint of a smile touched his lips. She's extraordinary. Yes, I agreed, feeling a surge of pride. She is. Would you tell me about her? He asked, and the genuine interest in his voice caught me off guard. Not the surface details, the real things. What makes her who she is. So I did. I told him about Maya's passion for art and social justice, about her struggle with anxiety that she faced with such courage, about her friendships, her dreams for the future, her capacity for empathy that sometimes overwhelmed her in a world that could be so harsh. I spoke without censoring, without worrying how he would judge these traits, and found myself painting a portrait of my daughter in all her complex, beautiful humanity. He listened without interrupting, occasionally asking thoughtful questions that suggested he was truly engaged, truly wanting to understand. When I finally ran out of words, he sat back in his chair, eyes slightly damp. She gets that from you. You know, he said softly. That depth of feeling, that integrity. The compliment, so unexpected and genuine, made my throat tighten. I think she came into this world with her own unique spirit, I managed. I've just tried not to crush it. Unlike what I did with you, he said, the self-awareness in his voice both surprising and painful to hear. I didn't deny it. We both knew it was true. Why? I asked. The question that had haunted me for decades finally finding voice. Why was it so important that I be someone other than who I was? He looked down at his hands, aged and spotted now, but still strong. I thought I was protecting you, he said finally. From struggle, from disappointment, from a world that can be very hard on people who don't conform. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine. Your mother and I came from nothing. Everything we achieved, we fought for. I never wanted you to have to fight that hard. But I did anyway, I said quietly. Just for different things. He nodded, acknowledgement and regret in the gesture. Yes. And I missed the strength in that. The courage. He took a sip of his coffee, gathering himself. My father tried to tell me, in his way. But I couldn't hear him. And now? Now I'm trying to listen, he said simply, before it's too late. As I drove home from the cafe, my emotions were too complex to name. There had been no dramatic reconciliation, no Hollywood moment where decades of hurt were suddenly washed away. But there had been something perhaps more valuable. Honesty. A willingness to see and be seen that offered, if not healing itself, at least the conditions under which healing might someday be possible. Maya was waiting for me, trying not to look anxious but checking her phone too frequently, watching the door with barely concealed anticipation. How was it? She asked the moment I walked in. I sat beside her on the couch, suddenly exhausted but also lighter somehow. It was a beginning, I said. She nodded, understanding the weight of those simple words. That something isn't it? Yes, I agreed, putting my arm around her and pulling her close. That's definitely something. And in that moment, with my remarkable daughter beside me and the first tentative bridge extending across years of family brokenness, I felt a sense of possibility I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a very long time. Not the false hope of perfect resolution, but the realistic promise that truth, once spoken, creates space for something new to grow. The pocket watch sat on our mantel now, no longer hidden away but displayed where we could see it daily. A reminder not of loss or things withheld, but of courage found and truth reclaimed. Its steady ticking seemed to whisper that it's never too late to begin again, never too late to speak your truth, never too late to become the person you were always meant to be. 6 months after that transformative Christmas, I stood in the doorway of Maya's bedroom, watching her pack for a summer art program she'd been accepted to at the state university. Her movements were methodical, precise, each item carefully considered before being placed in her suitcase. So like her in every way, thoughtful, intentional, nothing wasted or carelessly done. Do you think 2 sketchbooks is enough? She asked without looking up, somehow sensing my presence. Maybe pack 3, I suggested. You know how you get when inspiration strikes. She smiled, adding another black-bound book to her growing pile. This opportunity had come unexpectedly, a door opening we hadn't imagined possible just months earlier. The prestigious 3-week program rarely accepted high school students, but Maya's portfolio and her powerful personal essay about finding her voice through art had impressed the selection committee. What she didn't know, what I had only recently learned myself, was that the final push had come from an unlikely source. My father had made a call to an old college friend who sat on the university's board. Not to demand Maya's acceptance as he might have once done, invoking privilege and connection to override merit. Instead, he had simply asked that her application receive fair consideration, that her unusual talent not be overlooked because of her youth. She deserves to be judged on her own merits, he'd told me when I discovered his involvement. I just wanted to make sure she got that chance. It was a small thing, perhaps, but representative of the subtle shift in our family dynamics. Over the past 6 months, not a dramatic transformation, but a gradual recalibration. Thousands of tiny adjustments in how we spoke to each other, how we listened, how we made space for truths long suppressed. "Mom?" Maya's voice pulled me from my thoughts. "You're doing that thing again." "What thing?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. "That thing where you get all contemplative and misty-eyed watching me do completely ordinary stuff." She rolled her eyes, but the gesture was affectionate. "I'm just packing socks, not leaving for college yet." I laughed, acknowledging the accuracy of her observation. "Can't help it. Occupational hazard of being your mom." She zipped a compartment of her suitcase closed with finality. "Well, save some of that emotional energy for tonight. Dinner at Grandpa's is going to require reserves." It was said lightly, but we both felt the weight behind the words. Tonight would be the first time we'd have dinner at my father's house, the house I'd grown up in, since Maya's confrontation at Christmas. We'd seen him in neutral locations over the intervening months: coffee shops, restaurants, the art museum when Maya had a piece displayed in a student exhibition. But this was different. This was him inviting us into his space, a space filled with complicated memories and unspoken history. "Are you nervous?" I asked, crossing the room to sit on the edge of her bed. She considered the question with her usual thoughtfulness. "Not nervous exactly. Just aware that it matters. To him. To you." She looked up, those eyes so like mine searching my face. "To me too, I guess." I reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture from her childhood that she still allowed occasionally. "We can still cancel if you want. He'd understand." "No," she said decisively. "I want to go. I think it's important. For all of us." Her certainty steadied me, as it had so many times since Christmas. Sometimes I wondered who was the parent, and who was the child in our relationship. Maya possessed a moral clarity, an emotional intelligence that continually amazed me. She didn't ignore the complexity of our family situation or pretend that decades of hurt could be erased in months. But neither did she shy away from the difficult, necessary work of rebuilding what had been broken. "Besides," she added with a mischievous smile, "I want to see if he actually hung my artwork like he said he would." I laughed, grateful for the lightness she brought to the moment. My father had purchased one of Maya's pieces from the student exhibition, a mixed media work that explored themes of time, memory, and family legacy. It was abstract, but powerful, incorporating fragments of old photographs, bits of antique watch mechanisms, and passages from my grandfather's journal that I'd allowed her to copy. When he bought it, insisting on paying the full asking price, rather than expecting it as a gift, Maya had been simultaneously pleased and suspicious. "He'd better have it in the living room," she continued, "not hidden away in a back hallway." "If it's not prominently displayed, we're leaving immediately," I promised, raising my hand in a mock oath. The drive to my father's house that evening felt both strange and familiar, muscle memory guiding me through turns I hadn't taken in years. Maya sat beside me, unusually quiet, her fingers tapping a rhythmless pattern on her thigh, a sure sign she was more nervous than she'd admitted. "It's just dinner," I said, reaching over to still her hand with mine. "Right," she agreed. "Just dinner. With the grandfather who once called me a disappointment and now wants to play happy family." The bluntness of her assessment made me wince, but I couldn't deny its accuracy. "People can change, Maya." "I know," she said softly. "I've seen it. In him. In Uncle James. Even in Aunt Catherine." She looked out the window at the passing landscape of my childhood neighborhood. "I just don't want you to get hurt again." Her protectiveness touched me deeply. How had I raised this fierce guardian, with her unerring moral compass and her instinct to shield others from pain? "I'm the parent here, you know," I reminded her gently. "It's my job to worry about you, not the other way around." She gave me a look that was far too knowing for her years. "That's not how family works, Mom. Not real family. We look out for each other." We pulled into the circular driveway of my father's Georgian colonial, its imposing facade looking exactly as it had throughout my childhood. Manicured perfection, a showpiece designed to impress rather than welcome. But something was different tonight. The front door stood open, and my father was on the porch steps waiting for us, not inside expecting us to announce ourselves through the formal doorbell. "He's nervous too," Maya observed with surprise. "Yes," I agreed, recognizing the uncharacteristic gesture for what it was, an attempt to bridge the formality that had always characterized our family interactions. "I think he is." He greeted us with an awkwardness that was itself revealing. Harold Mitchell, master of corporate boardrooms and civic galas, uncertain in his own home about how to welcome his daughter and granddaughter. There was no artificial heartiness, no pretense that this was just another family dinner. Instead, there was a genuine, halting attempt at connection. "Eleanor, Maya, thank you for coming," he said, his voice carrying a warmth I rarely associated with him. "Please, come in." The interior of the house was both familiar and strange to me. The architecture was unchanged, the sweeping staircase, the formal living room to the right, the dining room with its crystal chandelier to the left. But there were subtle differences. Fresh flowers where there had once been austere arrangements. New art on the walls, less traditional than what my mother had preferred. Books on the side tables that looked actually read rather than selected for their decorative spines. And there, in the center of the living room wall where my mother's formal portrait had once hung, was Maya's artwork. Not tucked away or relegated to a secondary space, but given pride of place, beautifully framed and properly lit. Maya stopped short when she saw it, her eyes widening. "You really hung it," she said, forgetting her practiced poise. My father followed her gaze, something like pride crossing his features. "Of course I did. It's extraordinary." He approached the piece, standing beside Maya as they both looked up at it. "I've spent hours looking at it, seeing something new each time." The genuine appreciation in his voice caught us both by surprise. This wasn't the polite praise of a grandfather indulging a child's hobby. This was one artist recognizing another, acknowledging the depth and intention behind the work. "The way you've incorporated the watch mechanisms," he continued, pointing to a particular section, "setting them against these fragments of the old family photographs. It's a powerful statement about how time shapes our understanding of ourselves, of our history." Maya stared at him, clearly not having expected this level of engagement with her art. That's exactly what I was trying to convey," she said. He nodded, a hint of sadness crossing his face. "I was an art history major in college. You know, before my father convinced me that business was the only sensible path. This was news to me. In all my years, I'd never known this about my father." "You never told me that," I said, unable to keep the surprise from my voice. He turned to me, something vulnerable in his expression. "There are many things I never told you, Eleanor. Many things I barely acknowledged to myself." He gestured toward the dining room. "Perhaps we can begin to change that over dinner?" The meal was unlike any I'd experienced in that house. Gone was the formal service, the silent staff appearing and disappearing with military precision. Instead, my father had prepared the food himself. A simple but beautifully presented meal that he served family style, passing dishes around the table as if we'd done this 100 times before. "You cooked?" I couldn't hide my astonishment. "I've been taking classes," he admitted, seeming almost embarrassed. "At the community center downtown. Culinary basics for, as the brochure tactfully puts it, seniors beginning their independent living journey." The image of my father, With his tailored suits and lifelong reliance on household staff, learning to chop vegetables alongside other elderly people struggling with recent widowhood or retirement was almost impossible to reconcile with the wee man I'd known. But the evidence was before us. A perfectly roasted chicken, seasonal vegetables, fresh bread that he'd admitted, with a mixture of pride and chagrin, that he'd baked himself. "It's really good, Grandpa," Maya said, genuine appreciation in her voice. "Thank you," he replied, and I could see how much her simple praise meant to him. I'm learning that there's a certain satisfaction in creating something with your own hands, something I missed in all those years of... He trailed off, searching for the right words. "Of having everything done for you?" I suggested, not unkindly. He nodded, accepting the gentle challenge in my observation. Yes, exactly that. The conversation flowed more easily than I would have thought possible, weighted with history but not paralyzed by it. We talked about Maya's upcoming art program, about a restoration project I was working on at the museum, about my father's recent decision to step back from daily involvement in his company. "I've appointed a new CEO," he told us, "someone from outside the family. The board wasn't happy, but it was time." "What prompted that?" I asked, genuinely curious. The business had been his life's work, his identity for as long as I could remember. He was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "I've been reading a lot these past few months, philosophy mainly, trying to understand what makes a life well lived." He looked at Maya, then at me. "I've come to believe it isn't what I thought for most of my life. It isn't acquisition or achievement or control." "What is it then?" Maya asked, leaning forward with interest. "Connection," he said simply. "Authentic connection. To others, to oneself, to something larger than personal ambition." He smiled, slightly, self-deprecatingly. "It sounds obvious, I know. The kind of platitude you find on greeting cards. But understanding it intellectually is very different from feeling its truth in your bones." I studied him across the table. This man, who looked like my father but spoke a language I'd never heard from him before, was this genuine transformation, or merely a performance designed to win back a place in our lives? The skeptical part of me, the part shaped by years of disappointment, remained wary. Yet there was something in his demeanor, in the unguarded quality of his expression, that suggested authenticity. This wasn't the polished, controlled Harold Mitchell who had dominated my childhood. This was someone more human, more vulnerable, someone struggling toward a truth he'd spent decades avoiding. After dinner, he suggested we move to his study, a room that had once been the most intimidating space in the house for me, the place where judgments were delivered and expectations reinforced. Like the rest of the house, it had changed. The imposing desk remained, but the space felt less like a fortress. The curtains were open, letting in the evening light. Books were scattered across surfaces, some open, pages marked. A record player I'd never seen before sat in one corner, a collection of vinyl beside it. "I've been reacquainting myself with music," he explained, following my gaze. "Jazz, mainly. Your grandfather loved jazz. Did you know that?" I shook my head, another piece of family history I'd never been told. He had an extensive collection that I foolishly sold after he died. Thought it was just clutter. He ran his fingers along the edge of a record sleeve. "I've been trying to reconstruct it, hunting down the albums he used to play when I was a boy." There was something deeply poignant about this. My father, at 72, trying to reconnect with a part of his father he'd dismissed in life, seeking to recover something precious he'd discarded without understanding its value. "Why now?" I asked quietly. "Why all of this now?" He sat heavily in one of the leather chairs, gesturing for us to take seats as well. Maya perched on the arm of my chair, her presence solid and reassuring beside me. "Because Maya's courage At Christmas forced me to see what I'd been avoiding for decades, he said directly. The patterns, the loss, the price of the choices I've made. He looked at my daughter with unmistakable respect. She made me face truths I'd spent a lifetime running from. Maya shifted uncomfortably beside me, unused to such direct acknowledgement. I was just angry, she said. I wasn't trying to be profound. Sometimes truth needs anger behind it to break through walls of denial, my father replied. Your great-grandfather understood that, I think. He just couldn't find the anger himself. He stood and walked to his desk, opening a drawer, and removing a small wooden box I'd never seen before. I have something for both of you, he said, returning to where we sat. Not to try to make amends. I know objects can't do that, but because they belong with you more than with me. He opened the box and removed 2 items. The first was a delicate silver bracelet set with small opals that caught the light as he held it out to Maya. This belonged to your great-grandmother, he said. My mother. She was an artist too, a talented watercolorist, though she rarely showed her work to anyone outside the family. She would have recognized the gift in you immediately. Maya took the bracelet with careful fingers, turning it to watch the play of colors in the stones. It's beautiful, she whispered. She wore it every day, my father continued. Said the opals reminded her that beauty reveals itself differently depending on how the light hits it. Rather like truth. He smiled faintly. She was wiser than I gave her credit for at the time. Then he turned to me, holding out the second item, a small leather-bound book I didn't recognize. This was your mother's, he said. Her private journal from the years before she became ill. I stared at it, stunned. My mother had died when I was 22, after a long battle with cancer that had dominated my late teens. In my memory, she existed primarily as my father's echo, reinforcing his values, his judgments. I had loved her, but never felt truly known by her. I found it recently, going through some old files, he continued. I should have given it to you years ago. But I was afraid. Of what? I asked, not reaching for the journal yet. Of what it might tell you about her. About us. About the cracks in the perfect family facade we worked so hard to maintain. He held it out to me, an offering. She wasn't always the person you knew. Before the illness, before the fear took over, she had dreams of her own. Doubts. Regrets. A rich inner life I didn't fully appreciate until it was too late. I took the journal, feeling its weight, physical and metaphorical, in my hands. This was my mother's voice, preserved across time, perhaps offering insights into the woman behind the carefully maintained exterior I'd known. Thank you, I said, not sure what else to add. Don't thank me, he replied, a flash of the old directness returning. I kept it from you for years out of cowardice. That deserves no gratitude. His honesty, unvarnished and uncompromising, was perhaps the most convincing evidence of genuine change. The Harold Mitchell I'd grown up with had never acknowledged weakness, never admitted error, never revealed doubt. Maya, perceptive as always, broke the emotional tension of the moment. Is that a chess set? She asked, nodding toward a small table in the corner where an antique board was set up, pieces arranged mid-game. My father looked surprised by the question. Yes, I've been teaching myself to play. Another community center offering. He smiled slightly. I'm not very good yet. I play, Maya said. The art teacher at school runs a chess club. I could show you some moves if you want. It was a simple offer, casually made, but the impact on my father was visible. This small, ordinary gesture of connection from his granddaughter. Not forgiveness exactly, but an opening, a possibility. I'd like that very much, he said, his voice rough with emotion he would once have concealed at all costs. As Maya moved to the chess table with my father, I watched them. Her explaining something about the arrangement of pieces, him listening, with genuine interest. They were not magically transformed into a typical grandfather and granddaughter. The history between our families erased. The wariness remained, the careful navigation of still tender wounds. But there was also something new emerging, a tentative bridge across years of silence and judgment, built not on pretense, but on a mutual willingness to see and be seen. Later that night, after we'd returned home, Maya sat cross-legged on my bed as I carefully opened my mother's journal. We read together, discovering a woman neither of us had known. A woman with doubts about the life she'd chosen, with regrets about her relationship with her strong-willed daughter, me. With dreams, deferred and questions unasked. A woman more complicated, more human than the perfect wife and mother she'd presented to the world. She was afraid too, Maya observed, pointing to a passage where my mother wrote about her concerns that I was being pushed too hard, shaped too forcefully into a mold that didn't fit me. She just didn't know how to stand up to Grandpa either. No, I agreed, tracing my mother's familiar handwriting with my fingertip. I don't think many people did. Except you, Maya said, bumping my shoulder with hers. You did, even when it cost you everything. I smiled at her, this wise child who saw strengths in me I hadn't always recognized myself. And you definitely did. She shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. I just got angry enough to say what everyone was thinking. That's called courage, Maya. Speaking truth when it's easier to stay silent. We continued reading, piecing together a more complete picture of my mother, of my parents' marriage, of the complex dynamics that had shaped our family long before I was aware of them. It wasn't all revelation. Some entries reinforced what I'd always known about my mother's social anxieties, her deference to my father. But there were surprises too. Her private pride in my artistic abilities, her secret wish that she'd pursued education beyond the finishing school her parents had insisted upon. Do you think people ever really know each other? Maya asked, as we closed the journal in the early hours of the morning. Like, completely? I considered the question, thinking of all the layers we'd uncovered in recent months. My grandfather's hidden pride in me, my mother's unexpressed doubts, my father's abandoned passion for art. The parts of ourselves we conceal, sometimes even from ourselves. I think we glimpse each other through windows, I said finally. Some clear, some clouded. And the ones we love, the ones we truly try to understand, we might see more of them than others do. But completely? I'm not sure that's possible. That's kind of sad, she said, frowning. I don't think so, I replied. It means there's always more to discover in the people we love. More depth, more complexity. It means we never have to stop growing together, learning each other. Jimmy considered this, then nodded slowly. Like great-grandpa's letter, and grandma's journal, and grandpa learning to cook and play chess at 72. Exactly, I said, marveling at her perception. People aren't fixed, Maya. We're all works in progress until the end. She leaned her head against my shoulder, suddenly looking very young despite her wisdom. Do you think we'll be okay? As a family, I mean? Not perfect or anything, just okay? I put my arm around her, drawing her close. I think we already are, I said softly. Not because everything's resolved or because the past doesn't matter anymore, but because we're finally being honest about who we are, what we need from each other. That's where healing starts. As Maya drifted off to sleep beside me, the journal resting between us like a bridge across time, I thought about the journey we'd taken since that Christmas day 6 months ago. The confrontation, the revelations, the slow, sometimes painful process of rebuilding what had been broken, or perhaps building something entirely new from the rubble of what had never really worked. There were no guarantees, of course. My father might retreat back into old patterns. Family dynamics ingrained over decades might reassert themselves in moments of stress or conflict. The path forward would not be smooth or straight. But something fundamental had shifted. A truth had been spoken that couldn't be unheard. And in that truth, painful as it had been, lay the possibility of authentic connection, of relationships based not on performance or expectation, but on genuine seeing and being seen. My remarkable daughter had given all of us that gift, not by being perfect or by fulfilling expectations, but by refusing to participate in the family mythology, by standing in her truth even when it made others uncomfortable. She had shown courage I hadn't found until much later in life, wisdom I was still learning, compassion that balanced accountability with the possibility of growth. In the soft glow of my bedside lamp, watching her sleep, I felt a profound gratitude for this child who had somehow grown into a mirror, reflecting back to me not just my features or mannerisms, but my strength, my resilience, my capacity to love without conditions. And in that reflection, I recognized something I had spent too many years doubting: my own worth, not measured in achievements or approval, but in the simple, powerful truth of who I had always been. They had called my daughter a disappointment. That Christmas day, never realizing she would become the catalyst for transformation, the voice that would finally break decades of silence, the bridge across generations of misunderstanding. And in standing up for me, for herself, for the truth of our lives together, she had reminded all of us what really matters in the end. Not the facades we construct or the expectations we fulfill, but the courage to be authentically ourselves, and the wisdom to recognize that in others. That is the true legacy worth passing on, the inheritance that matters most. And watching Maya's peaceful face in the gentle darkness, I knew it was in good hands. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.